Hello and welcome to Vote Chat. We're brought to you by the University of Otago's Department of Politics. My name's Peter Grace. We're in the media production studios of the university today, joined by a live audience, and we're also live streaming. So welcome to those of you in the audience and those of you who joined us online. As always, you can ask your questions on Twitter, and here's Tony to tell you the details.
Thank you, Peter. So this is the interactive part of our show today, and we've dedicated this to our online audience on Twitter. And you can log into Twitter, form your questions, and direct them to our Twitter handle, which is @OUVoteChat, or use the hashtag VoteChat14. Today's questions will be about the Southland Clutha electorate, youth engagement, and Todd's background. So please send your questions and your thoughts on those topics. And then I'll hand this back to Peter now, who will check in with us throughout the show to put your questions to Todd.
Thanks, Tony. We're joined today by Todd Barclay, who's standing for the electorate of Clutha-Southland, which was Bill English's electorate for the last 14 years. So welcome and thank you for joining us.
Thanks, Peter.
You're a new face to the National Party. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself and your background?
So I've spent 4.5 years working in Parliament prior to seeking this nomination. So I worked for Bill English for a year and a half interning in Wellington working on constituency issues for the Clutha-Southland electorate. Spent a little bit of time, a couple of weeks, in the Prime Minister's correspondence team, and then for about 3 months in Jerry Brownlee's office, also working on correspondence issues. And then for Hekia Parata, when she became a minister, worked for her for 2.5 years, eventually becoming one of her ministerial advisors when she was Minister of Education. Prior to that, I was born and bred in Gore, in the heart of Clutha-Southland, and that's where my family's from. That's where they're living now, and that's where I'm living now.
So what did your family do? Because I understood you ran a local supermarket, is that right? And Kiwi post office?
So I was born in Gore, and so I lived there for a couple of years. At the time, my parents had half shares in the Mitre 10 there with
right.
Alan and Sheena Ferguson, who Alan's dad's cousin, and he now owns the full 100% share. And then we moved to Dipton for about 7 or 8 years, where my parents ran the Foursquare and the Mail Run around the Dipton area. And then we moved back to Gore in my last year at primary school.
Okay. And were your parents in any way political? Did you come from a political family? Did you discuss it around the dinner table?
No, I think probably the same as a lot of people in the Clutha-Southland area, particularly in the provincial areas. They're loyal National Party supporters, and they've always supported Bill English. They've always backed him, no matter what's happened in his career. But they're not political at all, so they haven't really shown much of an interest in politics until I started working at Parliament, and I think their interest has developed over those years. So, yeah. But no, not particularly political.
But you're only 24, which is an age where I can't imagine many young people think about running for Parliament. So how did that come about? What got you into that?
Well, Nick Smith, when he ran for the Nelson electorate, for the Nelson seat, he was 23, and he was 24 when he entered into Parliament. Tony Ryle was about 25, Simon Upton was about 24, Bill English was 27 or 28. So there are a lot of people within the National Party that have expressed an interest in politics at a young age, and they've gone on to be some of our greatest politicians. But for me, it was when I moved up to Wellington to study. I just turned up at Parliament one day to watch Question Time and thought it looked pretty cool. So naively, I emailed Bill English, our local MP, and I think it was on a Sunday, just saying, "Hey, I'm Todd Barclay from Dipton. I'm not sure if you remember me, but I'm up in Wellington now. It'd be, I've been to Parliament and seen Question Time. It looks pretty interesting. How do you go about getting an internship?" And he emailed back sort of personally within about half an hour and said, what you see is the interesting side of it, but there's a lot of mundane work that goes on behind the scenes, so you should come in and spend the day with me and then figure out whether you're really interested in politics. So
you were doing a BCom at Victoria at the time, right?
I was studying towards a Bachelor of Commerce and a Bachelor of Laws at the time. And so after that day in Bill's office, that was what hooked me really. It was really interesting. What
was it about the experience that made you so interested in it?
Well, it was being able to see what goes on behind the scenes. I sat with him for a day at the time it was a few weeks before the budget, so there was a series of budget-related meetings. And he, spent a bit of time with each of his staff members, and it was his private secretary at the time who was looking after his electorate issues for the Clutha-Southland electorate, who interacts quite a lot with his staff in Clutha-Southland. That was really interesting to me because she was talking about the issues, the wide range of issues that were coming up. There'll be an immigration issue, there'll be something related to education and health and transport, but they were also wide-ranging, and it was just that side of it that I found really interesting.
Was there any, while you were doing your BCom, was there another aim in mind, or did you think that politics was going to be the one quite soon, or did you want to do something else first of all? No,
well, as I say, I started out studying towards a Bachelor of Law as well, and there was quite a lot of case law involved and a lot of statutes and that. And at that time, I was working, volunteering 3 days a week in Bill's office, and I really discovered quite soon then that I wasn't really interested in the law degree. I didn't want to become a lawyer anymore. I was interested in politics, so I pursued the Bachelor of Commerce, and it was from that point where I knew that eventually I wanted to. I didn't know when, whether it be sort of 3 years, 5 years, 20 years. I didn't know when. I just knew that it was something I was really interested in, and I wanted to work to achieve that. It was always going to be national? There was never a moment where you thought you might be playing for the other side? No, and the reason for that is that, my family are born and bred in Gora. They've always been strong supporters of the National Party without being political, but I think it's because of the values that the National Party represents, and it's the values that I've been brought up with as well. So, personal responsibility. Can you put your finger on what those values are exactly? Yeah, so, personal responsibilities, right. One of the main ones to me. I've always been sort of brought up that, if you're going to act, you need to be held accountable for your actions. So, discipline and personal responsibility, but also sort of free enterprise and choice. Free enterprise in the sense that, if somebody's willing to take a risk and to try and grow some wealth for themselves, then they should be able to have a flexible environment in order to do that. And also, and that links into choice as well. You need to have options available to make those choices. But it grew from that since I started in Bill's office, dealing with the number of constituency issues that came about. Mostly it was with people that had tried navigating the system of government but found it too complex or not public-facing enough, and they were sort of often at the end of their tether. So they tried navigating the system of government, it had failed for them, there was emotion, there was frustration, and often they came to their local MP, Bill, not knowing what they could do. So it was being able to help them navigate that system. That was quite rewarding. But for me, it really drilled home the sense that we don't need this big bureaucratic machine that we've got to the extent that it's become. And I think, one of the policy areas that I'm extremely supportive of is the Better Public Services Initiative, and that is 10 priorities across government, and it's all about sort of streamlining and making public service more efficient and more public-facing. So those values that the National Party represents are the values that my family represents, and the values that I was brought up with. So I'm interested in the comments you made about personal responsibility and business and entrepreneurship and those sorts of things, because it would be fair to say that Southland has some wealth down there, some quite wealthy farmers. What about the other side of things? I mean, where do you sit in terms of your views on poverty and some of the other issues? Yeah, so I think I'd probably describe myself as, in terms of when it comes to sort of economic policy and that sort of thing, quite sort of economically conservative. But then on the other side, social policy areas, I'm a bit more liberal. So I think times have changed. What sort of issues do you consider yourself more liberal on? I suppose, the same-sex marriage, for example, that goes back to the role of government. In my view, government plays a role in a number of aspects of our lives, but I think that role stops at the bedroom door. So I think times are changing. Who am I to say that if two people want to be together, right, that they shouldn't be? So, but in terms of the rest of the... When you say who am I, do you have friends who are homosexual? I mean... Yeah, I've got 2 friends that are right, homosexual, probably, maybe more, I don't know. So. Okay. Yeah, so you don't ask them, or it's not something that you discuss? No, well, if they're open about it, then that's fine, and I respect that. So, right, but in terms of, the issues, going back to some of the other issues in the Clutha-Southland electorate, you touched on poverty. I think poverty is clearly an issue that we face it in New Zealand, but I'm not sure if you were to walk down the street of Gore, if you were to ask somebody down in Gore or Balclutha or Queenstown what are the top 5 issues that come to mind, I don't think poverty would feature there. So I think, while that's not to say that there isn't an issue of poverty in the Clutha-Southland electorate, I don't think it is as prominent down in Clutha-Southland as what it is in, say, South Auckland or the east coast of the North Island or other places. So.
Do you have an interest in that side of the politics? I mean, have you had any experience of dealing with poor people, or is that something that's been, as you say, people in Gore don't have that issue?
Well, I don't come from a particularly well-off family, but what I'd say is that in all communities there are people from all across the wide spectrum of wealth, and the one sort of defining moment I suppose I'd have in that area would be when I worked for the Education Minister. She was proposing the reorganisation of the education network in Christchurch, and it was based on, there were 10,000 kids that had left the system, so you couldn't just build back the schools to the places they were, and demand had changed for education services. So she went down, she got a lot of flack for that, which I think was sort of unwarranted really. I can understand the personal connections people have with their school, but Christchurch is unique, and there was an earthquake, and times have changed and things need to be done a little bit differently for the better, and that was her approach. So when she was going down visiting the 35 or so schools that were affected by the proposals of the government, after consultation, I accompanied her to most of those schools, and you go to some of the areas, the lower socioeconomic areas of Christchurch, where these people were just latching onto their schools, and you could sense the emotion, and you could tell, Hekia was getting abused, she was getting sworn at, and things were being chucked at her. But so for me, it was a defining moment, and it was something that it made me want to say, if you're going to make a policy sort of initiative that affects a group of people, you have to front up and you have to explain it to them, and that's why I particularly admire Hekia for doing that. So yes, I have been exposed to that side of it.
How do you feel about that side of politics, which is the heckling and the abuse and those sorts of things? Are you resilient enough to handle that kind of thing?
Yeah, I think so. I think that's the nature of the role. I think if you're putting your hand up for any public role, then you need to expect that that's part of it, because in government, or even as a constituency MP, you're trying to represent your community, and it's a Clutha-Southland electorate, for example, such a diverse community. There are a huge number of communities with their own social needs and local issues, but you're never going to be able to represent a view that represents everybody's view. So I think you have to expect that, and I believe I am.
And mentoring, you've mentioned some of the top-level people in the National Party that you've worked with. Are there any who you particularly admire or would like to base your career around?
So Bill English, for the year and a half that I was interning in his office, he's an incredibly busy person, you should expect, and it didn't matter what was happening in his ministerial responsibilities or in his finance role or his deputy prime minister role, he was all over the country. If there was an issue that was dear to somebody in his electorate's heart, he would always make the time to come up to speed with it and do whatever he could to help. Okay. So I think he's your quintessential Southlander. He's a down-to-earth Clutha-Southland bloke. He's up at Wellington in a suit and tie at Parliament one day, and then the next he's down at the Dipton Fire Brigade annual Christmas party, having a yarn and having a laugh with the locals. And I think, he's a true representative of the area, and I incredibly admire him. Okay. And this, I think it goes to say the same for Hekia Parada and Jerry Brownlee. Hekia is absolutely passionate about delivering a positive education result for all Kiwi kids, and the focus that she's putting on Maori and Pacific Islanders as well, bringing them up to the same standard as mainstream New Zealanders, is incredibly admirable, and I loved working for her, and I think she does a fantastic job in the education portfolio.
Okay, we've got another question. Our first Twitter question. Tony, please.
Absolutely. So our question now comes from Hugh Davidson at Hugh Mama, and he asks, how likely are you to actively voice concerns about proposed National Party policies that could be seen as unethical? So this goes back to our previous questions about perhaps social policy or connection of emotion.
That's a nice curly one.
So I'm not too sure exactly what specific proposals he's referring to that could be seen as unethical.
I think he probably means just in general, if there's something that you see unethical, or would you voice concerns to something that came up that would be potentially unethical?
Yeah, well, I think in my relative youth probably, might demonstrate my answer here, but in the time that I've been involved with politics, I haven't seen anything that the National Party's put up that has been unethical. So there's nothing that's crossed my boundary there.
No, I'd be very surprised if you would have answered any other way. But I think the question was more about conscience votes and things. You know, you talked about same-sex marriages.
Yep.
How do you feel about conscience votes?
Yeah. So for conscience votes, each MP has the opportunity to cast their vote in however they like. For me personally, if I'm lucky enough to win the seat on September the 20th and I become the MP for Clutha-Southland, then I'd be wanting to take a wide consensus of the electorate about the particular view. So I'm not going to just say, right, this is my vote, I'm going to cast it how I think. Mm-hmm. Of course, I'm going to have an opinion on everything, but I'm going to do my best to take a wide sounding from the Clutha-Southland electorate, and whichever vote, however I cast my vote, will be in the best interest of the electorate, even if that conflicts with my own personal view.
Okay. Well, let's just talk a little bit perhaps about your role as the Corporate Affairs Manager at Philip Morris, because obviously that's something that everybody's ears pricked up when they heard about it. What was your role there?
I was, so one of two Corporate Affairs Managers in the New Zealand office. It involved business, stakeholder engagement, government relations, media relations, engagement with our retailers, engagement with our consumers, engagement with our own staff. We'd quite regularly provide updates around regulatory issues for the staff.
Mm-hmm.
The tobacco industry is one of the most highly regulated industries in the country. Mm-hmm. Yet they're still selling a legal product and there's still a demand for that product. So I think it was incredibly important for us to ensure as a company that we were meeting the regulations as they were set by the government, and that we were portraying a favourable image to the public as that we were acting responsibly as a company. So right. That was, broadly speaking, it was a stakeholder engagement role, talking about the company, putting forward the company's views on particular matters, and taking soundings from business groups and putting that back to the company.
So how did you come about this job? Because this was after you had been working for Bill English & Co?
So I left after 4.5 years in Parliament. I moved up to Auckland, and I was working at a role at a PR firm called Sweeney Vesti there for about 6 months. Mm-hmm. I figured if I was going to go into politics eventually, then I needed to get some private sector experience. I think it's critical as a parliamentarian to understand business and to understand the constituents which you're making policy that will affect. So I wanted to get that experience. I started working for a PR firm in Auckland, Sweeney Vesti, and I missed politics, and I was looking for any opportunity to get back to it, and government that was still within the private sector sort of field. So it was government relations that I wanted to do. It was where my heart was still, and those jobs are pretty few and far between, and a lot of the times they don't get advertised. You need a hell of a lot of experience to get a role there. I didn't have that much experience, and I wanted to gain that.
So the other corporate affairs manager that you were working alongside, was that a person of your age, or was that somebody much older?
No, it was somebody a wee bit older. Yeah. So
what, 30s or?
Oh, about 30 or so, I suppose.
Okay.
Yeah.
And is that normal to give a person of your experience a role as big as that at Philip Morris?
I think Philip Morris, like a lot of companies who invest in the corporate affairs space, they do it because they want to get an understanding of government, and they want to understand the environment, the regulatory environment that they're operating. So I think, given I'd worked at Parliament and I understood the system of government and I understood, the legislative process and all that, they saw that as value to them. And I imagine there's probably not too many people that would, with that skill set, that would want to put their hand up to work for a tobacco company.
Yep.
So I applied for the role, to get experience and
It's a very fair question, I think. Why did you want to go and work for a tobacco company?
So, it's not like I set out wanting to work for a tobacco company. As I said, I wanted to get into the government relations, corporate affairs space. The roles were pretty few and far between. In fact, there weren't any advertised for months, since I'd started looking. So when this role came up, I applied for it. I knew that if it was the skill set that I wanted to get, that it was. What better place to do it in one of the country's most heavily regulated environments and challenging environments. So the idea was the idea was to get the experience that I needed over a year and a half, and then transition that into another company, with the view of the end game still wanting to get into politics.
I can see the magnificent opportunity for anybody young starting out to be involved in something that really has an awful lot of money and power and strategic thinking behind it. But you must have had qualms that if you wanted to go into a career in politics, that the name Philip Morris was not going to look good on your CV.
Well, I was there for 8 months. I never intended to be there for a long period of time. At the end of the day, it was a professional development step that I took. So obviously, a lot of those things did cross my mind. At the end of the day, I made the decision to pursue the role for a professional development step so that I could then bring those skill sets back to politics. Just because I worked there for 8 months doesn't mean that defines who I am or how I will act in Parliament. If, for example, the Labor Party just around my time of my nomination elected a TAB bookie to run in the Wairarapa seat, does that mean that person doesn't deserve to win that seat? There's people that have worked in the liquor industry and the fast food industry, high-fat, sugary food industries. Does that mean that they don't have the opportunity to represent?
Well, the issue is, as we discussed before, I've come from a background in advertising, so I'm well aware of it. But to look squeaky clean when you're going to be a politician, I think you would have avoided those sorts of roles. I can't see how working for fast food or working for liquor would have been any better. I would have thought that there would have been a warning bell that would say, this is not going to look right in 6 months' time when I go to the electorate.
No, well, it was, as I say, it was the skill set and the experience that I wanted to gain.
Right.
And if we were to discount everybody who had worked in an industry that, to a certain faction of the public, deem that as being inappropriate, then the House of Representatives would be a pretty empty place, I think. Well,
okay, so there's a government bill currently before Parliament that's about plain paper packaging on cigarettes. Yeah. Obviously, Philip Morris were involved in submissions on that. Were you there when those submissions were being put together, and what was your role? Yes,
and part of my role was to meet up, to engage with our retailers, our consumers, with the government, with other business groups, to put forward our views on that particular policy issue. So obviously it was presenting the evidence that we had, which demonstrated the time that the argument for plain packaging doesn't stack up. Mm-hmm. But one thing I'd like to make quite clear is that I totally support the government's efforts to become smoke-free by 2025, and I support the Prime Minister's position on plain packaging, which is that he wants to await the outcome of the WTO cases against Australia and a number of other sort of private suits against the Australian government before he makes a decision as to whether or not New Zealand will implement plain packaging.
So what is his rationale behind waiting? Because I have heard that a lot of people are criticising it in terms of let's see how badly the Australians get beaten up, and then we'll revise our opinion after that.
No, I think, fundamentally he wants the evidence. He wants to see the evidence. He wants, and at the same token, that's what he said. That he wants to wait the outcome of the WTO cases. Part of that process is going to expose the evidence, either for or against. And also, he's equally said that it's a topic worthy of significant public debate. That's why he's allowed the process to go through to select committee stage, which again gives people opportunity to submit on plain packaging, whether they're supportive or against it, and it gives an opportunity to air some of the evidence that's out there internationally. I think Australia was the first country to progress with plain packaging. New Zealand was the second to announce their intentions to. The tobacco industry in New Zealand, but also worldwide, is highly regulated. I think that, any policy developments in that space, as any other topic, needs to be based on evidence. And so I think.
What's your personal view on this? Because you say you don't smoke.
Yeah.
You wouldn't encourage people to smoke, I think you've been quoted on saying.
Yeah.
So how do you feel about plain paper packaging? Do you think it's a good thing? Do you think that the cigarettes should be eventually phased out entirely?
Well, I support the Prime Minister's position, which is that he wants to await the outcome of the WTO case to see whether or not plain packaging tobacco products will achieve the government's intention, which is, will it reduce youth uptake of smoking, or will it take people away from smoking? And so I think I'm supportive of any measure that reduces the level of smoking and prevents people from taking up smoking. However, so as that relates to plain packaging, if the evidence stacks up against that says that it will achieve that, then I'll be supportive of that.
Right. Okay. Well, let's just talk a little bit more about your politics. Would you describe yourself as socially conservative?
Well, I think I sort of touched on that before. I'm probably more, when it comes to the social sort of policy areas, a little bit more liberal. I think, we need to understand that there are factions of society that need support. Fundamentally, though, when it comes to the welfare system and social policy in general, I think government's role is to provide a hand up, not a hand out. And I think that's what National's doing. With the welfare reforms that Paula Bennett is doing a fantastic job of implementing over the last 6 years. It's an investment approach. So, okay, if we're going to be putting the money into helping these people, we want to see a return. So that's putting the onus back onto government departments and the bureaucracy to say, we've got a group of people out there that we need to support. We want to support them, but we want to see results. Same thing with education. Hekia Parata is doing a fantastic job of reshaping the way education is provided in this country. So she's established an education pipeline, basically, and this all sounds pretty simple, but it hasn't been done before. So looking at each part of the education system, from early childhood, transition into primary, transition into intermediate, transition to high school, then to tertiary or vocational pathways, how can we keep each kid in this system and to ensure it's a smooth transition? Part of the problem has been the rocky road of transition between each of those pillars. So, I think it's about, and education and social welfare as part of sort of social policy are two good examples. We want to invest a lot of money into it, but we want to ensure we're getting results, and we want to ensure that we're investing wisely. So that's sort of my view on it.
Mm-hmm. What issues of those that you've described would you say were close to your heart? What things will you push if you become the MP for Clutha-Southland?
I think Clutha-Southland experiences similar sort of challenges and issues, depending which way you look at it, as other electorates. And a skilled and safe workforce is one of those. Mm-hmm. In Clutha-Southland, population projections out to 2030 show a static population, which means that we're not going to increase our population, but at the same token, we've got an ageing population. So we need to find ways to attract and retain as younger, skilled people into the area.
How's that going to happen?
Well, I think, the government's doing a number of great initiatives at the moment with, Stephen Joyce is increasing the number of vocational sort of pathway opportunities and so working on apprenticeships. So he's in the last budget, there was about an extra 6,000 places for that. So it's providing opportunities for people in the trades to retain, their presence in Clutha-Southland and work in that area. Similarly...
well, Clutha-Southland's having a bit of a boom still with dairy, but not much else, would that be fair to say?
No, I don't think that's... I wouldn't agree with that. The red meat and wool sector is going very well as well. So is our forestry industry. Tourism, obviously, in the Queenstown area. The Tourism Resort College there's doing fantastic. They're at capacity. They're wanting to expand. So that's another positive initiative through private investment with government in the Queenstown area that I'd be looking to, promote and encourage for expansion on. So, we've got dairy. It is one of the largest income earners, not only for Clutha-Southland but New Zealand. But there are a number of other areas as well. So, yeah.
You've got effectively two electorates, really, haven't you? You've got the Queenstown area, and then you've got the Gore area, in so much that they're quite disparate, quite different types of people live there, quite different businesses that they're working in. Do you have any issues with that? Is that something that's easy for you to I mean, you're obviously very comfortable with the Gore people. How do you get on with the Queenstown people?
Oh, yeah, I think we're all cut from the same cloth, really. There are a lot of people from the Clutha-Southland, wider Clutha-Southland electorate outside of Queenstown that holiday in Queenstown. A lot of people retire there. A lot of people have got friends and family there. It's a 2-hour drive from Gore, so it's hardly another country away.
Queenstown is a very different place.
Yeah, no, it is.
Temperamentally, economically, everything. It
is, and I think that's what makes the electorate unique, is that we're not so heavily reliant on dairying in Clutha-Southland that we can't survive without it. We've got the tourism sector, as pointed out before, is going incredibly well, and I think coming from having spent time in Wellington and Auckland, the more urban sort of areas, coming back to Clutha-Southland where my roots are in the more provincial areas, I can relate to both parts of the electorate. I'm spending a day, if not a day and a half, in Queenstown each week, and I have been since I won the nomination. And I don't, I don't feel out of place there, or it's just another, looking at Clutha-Southland, including Queenstown, all the people are the same. They're all just wanting to get on with their lives. They're wanting to earn money, to earn a comfortable living, to have look after their families, but they're just going about it in different ways. So while Queenstown's quite internationally focused, Clutha-Southland's quite provincial community focused.
Right. You had a bit of a beef with the local newspaper Mountain Scene early on. Did you think that was fair, some of the criticism they levelled at you in terms of not knowing the local mayor's name and those sorts of things?
Oh, the Clutha-Southland electorate's got about 8 or 9 local territory sort of authorities when you consider it's a huge electorate. I think probably I should have known who the mayor was, but I think if you ask any of the Queenstowners who the mayor of Gore was, or the mayor of Balclutha, or the mayor of Southland District, it would have been the same.
Well,
so
doesn't that illustrate my point that really you've got quite a gap between what's happening in Queenstown and what's happening in Gore?
But if you ask someone in Balclutha who the mayor of Gore was, chances are they probably wouldn't know either. So So I'm just saying that it's such a huge electorate. There are a number of huge number of local communities with their own issues, and they're just going about their own business.
So what have you done to patch that up and make some inroads in Queenstown?
Well, I don't think I needed to patch anything up really. I spent a lot of time in Queenstown. I was there yesterday, in fact, and I'm there every week. And I've gone around I go around all the businesses quite regularly. Jackie Dean, MP for Waitaki, and I went business door knocking yesterday, and we went to the Queenstown. Destination Queenstown quarterly update and caught up with a lot of them again. So I'm spending a lot of time there. I don't think just because I'm not basing myself in Queenstown doesn't mean I can't service the Queenstown electorate. Bill English done a fantastic job of servicing all of Clutha-Southland from Wellington. So,
right. So how are you feeling going into the election? You've got big shoes to fill, and are you comfortable that you'll maintain his margin when?
Bill English has done a fantastic job over the last 24 years. He's built the Clutha-Southland seat up to what it is today. Over the last sort of 24 years, his role within the National Party and his responsibilities have increased at about the same pace at which his geographical responsibility for his electorate has increased. So he's done a brilliant job of balancing all of that and building the seat to what it is today. I think everybody around Clutha-Southland, he's a household name, he's highly respected, and my challenge, and I take the opportunity as being the new Clutha-Southland candidate, as a considerable responsibility, and I'm not taking anything for granted. And the biggest challenge is going to be earning the trust and the support of the people of Clutha-Southland, and that's what I'm focused on doing.
We've got another Twitter question from Tony.
Hi Peter, yes, so our question now comes from John Brinsley-Brewery at Brio247, and he asks Todd what his thoughts are about possible coalition partners, and are there any that you'd like to see in coalition or not?
I think that's a question for the Prime Minister, isn't it?
That's a question for the but it's been asked of you.
Yeah, well,
so have a go.
Those are decisions that the Prime Minister makes as to who National will or will not go into coalition with, and it's. I don't think the candidate for Clutha-Southland has any influence over that whatsoever.
Do you know some of the people, hanging around Parliament, do you know your opposite sides? Have you relationships with any of them?
I know the Epsom candidate for ACT, David Seymour, I worked closely with him when he worked for John Banks, and I worked for Hekia Parada over the charter schools project. So I know him. He's incredibly intelligent, and he's incredibly passionate about Auckland. So he's a really nice guy.
Well, it's going to be an interesting thing what's happening in Epsom. We had Julianne Genter here last week. And it's going to be a big battle, I think, that's coming up. You've got Don Nicholson down in Clutha-Southland, who's just been announced as being a candidate standing against you for ACT.
Yes.
What's your feeling about that?
Don stood in the last election against Bill English as well. I think anybody who's willing to put their hand up to contest a seat for a particular party, good on them. I don't have any personal view. I don't know Don. I've never actually met Don.
He's Federated Farmers, right?
Former Federated Farmers president.
Right, so one would imagine that he knows a lot of farmers.
Yeah, well, I think, National's done a lot for farming as well. In fact, National's done a lot more for farming than what the ACT Party's done for farming. The primary growth partnerships that Nathan Guy is progressing at the moment, there's been $700 million invested into primary growth partnerships, 18 projects across the country to support farmers. It's a partnership between industry and government. It's also the Sustainable Farming Fund, which is also a fund that's contestable for farmers. So National's doing a lot in that space already. So Don might know a few farmers. Doesn't mean that I don't. My family, my mum's side of the family all farm in Winton. So
but what happens,
my friends, a lot of them farm.
What happens if you don't get elected? I mean, obviously that would be an enormous disappointment. But what's the path after that?
I don't know. I'll cross that bridge when we come to it. My focus at the moment is that's why I resigned from my job immediately when I got the nomination. So I'm spending 100% of my time focused on getting around the electorate and building as much trust and respect as I can. So that's my focus at the moment. I'm not thinking anything past 20th of September at this point.
Would you go back to lobbying?
I don't know. I'm focused on trying to win the seat at this point in time.
A PR person we know has mentioned that what a wonderful thing on your CV a term or 2 terms in Parliament would be if you were going to return to lobbying. So do you think that would look good for you?
Well, my focus is on, as I said before, the Clutha-Southland electorates enjoyed strong, stable political representation for the last 24 years under Bill English, but also for decades before that under a couple of other people too. My focus is on trying to win this seat, and I want to, if I become the MP for Clutha-Southland, then I want to remain there for as long as I'm making a difference to the community of Clutha-Southland.
Okay. Now, your other candidates against you are Liz Craig from the Labor Party and Rachel Goldsmith from the Greens. Do you know these people? What's your feelings about them? Are they going to put up a bit of a battle for you?
Oh, I don't know. I'm focused on running my own campaign. I'm trying to be in a different town each day, so I'm getting out there meeting as many people as possible. I can't say I've come across either of the two of them in those
You've not
terms.
Met either of them?
I've met Rachel, but I haven't come across them campaigning, so I don't know what they're doing. But my focus is on running my own campaign. I'm not worried about what the opposition
Liz Craig,
doing.
of course, is a doctor, I understand, and so health will be a very important part of the way she campaigns. Is that a concern for you, given the fact that you've been working with Philip Morris? No,
and the reason why that is because as I'm going around the electorate, I've met hundreds of people, if not thousands already. Nobody's raised the issue of Philip Morris with me. I think it goes back to the issues of the electorate sort of talked about before. Is that most people, Clutha-Southland, if you were to walk down the street at Gore, you ask them what the top 5 issues are, it'll be about whether they've got a job, whether they can afford to live each week, and education and strong and safe families, and that it's the fundamental things that matter to them, not whether I had an 8-month stint at Philip Morris or not.
So what are you telling people when you meet them in the street and they say, why should we vote for you?
So I'm introducing myself, and I'm basically just, I'm saying that I'm talking about my family and my background, and to try and build a personal connection with people, just to demonstrate that, I am you, I'm from you, and I'll want to do my best in representing you.
You came out recently and said you were happy with the decision about the Fiordland monorail.
Yeah.
Can you give me a bit of background on that? Why were you happy with that?
It was a $200 million project proposed by a private entity, and I think that I agree with the outcome of the decision because it just showed that it wasn't going to stack up economically. So there were economic concerns, there were environmental concerns, but there were also social concerns. So I think part of the fear was economically, if the consent were to be approved, then you've got a provider that might get halfway through the project and not be able to afford to complete it. Then who's stuck with that burden? It's the taxpayer.
Right.
And environmentally, I'm not really too familiar with that side of it, but there were particularly a lot of the people around the Te Anau Manapori area were concerned about that, the environmental effects that proposal would have had, but also socially getting around Mosman and Lumsden and Winton and some of the towns that are surrounding Te Anau and Manapori. A lot of these people survive off the tourism flow that comes through on their way to Milford Sound and Te Anau. If you were to put that particular proposal in its current form through, a lot of the surrounding towns would have suffered by that. So
yes, I was in Te Anau a few weeks ago, and I think you're right.
I think the minister was quite clear in saying it's not to say that we're turning it back to any proposal in the future, but just this particular proposal didn't stack up. So that's why I can't.
Do you think it didn't stack up as a business plan? I mean, it seemed to me that there were 3 or 4 stages in the trip. You took a ferry, and then you took a bus, and then you took a monorail. I mean, it was a very strange experience.
Yeah, I don't know, and I'm not too concerned about the dynamics of the particular proposal. But the issue that the reason why I supported the outcome or the minister's decision was because it clearly didn't stack up economically from a taxpayer funding potential burden perspective. And the social impacts that it would have had on the surrounding communities. So they were the concerns that I was repetitively hearing as I was going around the electorate, and that's why it was a pleasing outcome. Okay.
So for you personally, what are the big things that you want to achieve in your politics career?
At the moment, I'm focused on trying to win the seat. So my focus is on building the trust and the respect of as many people in the area as possible, and demonstrating that I'm totally committed to working my hardest to be a strong advocate for them on all of the issues that are facing the various communities within the electorate going forward. But I think I touched on before, we're an electorate heavily reliant on a thriving set of primary industries, also on our trading relationship with the rest of the world, both through the sale of our primary industry, the goods that the primary industries generate, but also through tourism. But we can't do any of that unless we've got a skilled and safe workforce. And so those 3 broad areas and anything that I can do to help advocate or advance innovation, investment and prosperity in those 3 areas, that's where I'll be putting my focus.
So what sort of portfolios would you be interested in the future? Are there any particular that you would like to have?
I think we've got to try and win the seat first. That's what I'm focused on.
But it's a fair question. I mean, what are the ones that you would feel yourself heading towards?
Well, I think at the end of the day, it's the Prime Minister that decides the composition of his cabinet and his sort of administration. So, as I say, my focus at the moment is trying to win this seat. And the broad areas that I've touched on that are of direct importance to the prosperity of Clutha-Southland, the broad areas that I have a personal interest in as well.
Okay, all right. Thank you very much. Well, that's all we've got time for in Vote Chat. Thank you for joining us. I'd like to thank the students that helped us with the questions today. This is a student project. I'd like to thank Todd for joining us, and hope I wasn't too horrible to him. You can see the Vote Chat series on YouTube. I believe the tag is OU Vote Chat. So you're welcome to go on there and see us after the live stream and see any of the other ones that we've done in the past. So thank you. And we've got Poto Williams next week. So please join us then, and until then, goodbye.